Good afternoon. Most welcome at this session. I'm very happy to see so many intellectuals around the table. So it's a good sign for a very promising afternoon. My name is Peter Nijkamp, Vice President, Vice Chair of the Regional Science Academy. We have organized this session here today, of course, in cooperation with PRSCO, and we are very happy that we can contribute through a special, dedicated, interesting session to the success of PRSCO. I would like to thank in particular, of course, Dr. Park, who has been very instrumental in helping us in supporting this type of activity, which I think is very important. I also would like to welcome our friends from all over the world, because this is videotaped and broadcasted. So we have friends from all over the world. They can also join, and we'll also now and then have online interventions. So it's going to be some sort of an interactive type of activity. What are we going to do this afternoon? It is a session where we will try to meet the ambitions of the Regional Science Academy to support new thinking in regional science. So the Regional Science Academy is not a new independent organization. It's made up of very simple, bottom-up, made out of interested scientists. They can contribute to our new thinking, and we hope that this creates some new vitality and innovativeness in our work, because science is always making progress, but sometimes along different perspectives and different lines. And therefore, I'm so happy that we have so many young people here around the table, because they are the ones who have to carry the flag into the next generation. So bravo for the young generation. So having said that, what we are going to do here in the afternoon is based on several lines which we have tried to develop. And one of the lines we have tried to develop is new thinking on social well-being, happiness, and even love. And why are we going to develop that? It's part of our ongoing mission to advocate innovative thoughts and innovative research, which we can do, which can also sometimes be relevant for sending in research applications to national research councils and what have you, so that regional science is alive and well. We are organizing these types of meetings in different parts of the world. We have had a whole range of activities. We just came from a intensive training.
Recording in progress.
We just are coming from an intensive training week in Slovakia in Europe, where we met with 36 young people, postdocs, to train them how to use methods, etc. And here today we are in another type of brainstorm session. In a few weeks we will have, for instance, another interesting set of sessions in the Azores at the annual meeting of the European Regional Science Association. In that meeting we will also welcome Nobel laureate Paul Krugman and the famous Carlos Moreno, one of the gurus in urban planning nowadays. And we will again try to bring together economic thinking, planning thinking, urbanistic thinking, and see what it leads us to and how we can acquire new insights. So, having said this, I would like to give a small presentation myself on the theme we are having here today, and that is on, and I'll just use the pointer, on the geography of well-being and happiness. We have a set of speakers. They will address this topic from different perspectives, theoretical perspectives, conceptual perspectives, methodological perspectives, applied perspectives, and also policy perspectives. You find the list of speakers over there, but we'll also have, because of a nice long afternoon, we also have quite some time for a discussion. So I hope that also jointly with you and our friends online all over the world, we can develop some new types of thinking so that next year at our conferences, we might already get some first papers on the new vision on well-being and city love and happiness, etc. And we have several discussants also, who will, after each presentation, also give a first comment. But of course, the floor is always open to everyone, because that's the way we collectively develop some wisdom. There we go. So the small introduction, a preface, some footnotes I would like to present to you before we start the official presentations is based on a theme which I've called here From Happiness Research to City Love Research. I warn you, some of these statements are a little bit provocative. They're a little bit challenging. And of course, that's what we deliberately do, because we want to have also some criticism and some discussion. So do not hesitate to criticize us, because that's the way to make progress. And also for our young people, do not always believe what professors tell you. Make up your mind, and if you're critical to a professor, I was also a critical student, it's always good to first make up your own mind and then have a nice discussion also with your professor. So this is the theme I would like to present quickly to you. And I start for our American friends with the origin of our research, the Declaration of Independence. In the United States, Jeff, of course, will be amazed to see, but the origin was in fact created by Jefferson. He was in fact the grandfather of research on happiness, because in the Declaration of Independence, there you find here at the end of the Declaration, all the statements, and the pursuit of happiness. That was basic in the American Declaration of Independence. And some people say even that what is called USA, United States of America, in fact, Jefferson had given it a different meaning, not USA, United States of America, but you smile all, you smile all. So that in fact was the original meaning of the USA, you smile, had to do with the pursuit of happiness, which was in the Declaration of Independence. What has this meant for happiness research all over the world? Well, you may know that the Declaration of Independence, 1776. There's a debate on whether it was the 2nd of July, the 4th of July, and our American friends can tell us exactly that there was a 2-day delay between the declaration itself and the exception or the adoption of the declaration in a convention. But what is important, you think, well, that's where it started. But do not forget that 3 months before the Declaration of Independence, there was another important statement. You know which one? 3 months before, March 1776, the first publication of Adam Smith, The Wealth of Nations. Adam Smith was the first one, and in fact he also advocated the way you could create wealth of nations by looking into your own behavior and being a little bit pursuing your self-interest, but at the end it was all about happiness. If you want to know more about it, read the book recently edited by Dave Plain and Peter Beatty on Great Minds in Regional Science. In that book, Roberto Camagni, he passed away last year, unfortunately, but he has a fantastic article, 50 pages long, on the contribution of Adam Smith to the thinking, the basic thinking in regional science. And he claims Adam Smith was the first regional scientist, right? Okay, having said that, life goes on. And after the idea of happiness as the motivation for human behavior, of course, Other economists and philosophers and political scientists followed a little bit on that line. The most important and prominent person here was Jeremy Bentham. So his, as you can see, his life covered partly the period of the Declaration of Independence, but he took that up further. And he had one basic dogma in his philosophical economic analysis. And that is the idea in economics, you should strive for, and now it comes, the greatest happiness for the greatest number of people. That is, in fact, what drives society and also policy. The greatest happiness for the greatest number of people. You would say, well, it's very simple. It's not so simple, because in one sentence he combined two dilemmas in economics. The greatest happiness, you maximize welfare, for the greatest number of people. That's the distributional aspect. That's the old dilemma between economic growth and the distribution of growth. The greatest happiness of the greatest number. If you go to UCL, University College in London, and if you enter the courtyard of UCL, are you familiar with UCL? Because okay, very good. So you will know, if you enter the courtyard, you'll see the statue of Jeremy Bentham. Jeremy Bentham himself was a little bit an esoteric person, you know, all kind of stories about him. But in any case, he is seen as the grandfather of utilitarian thinking in economics. And in fact, modern happiness research is somehow based on some of the philosophical thinkings of early predecessors. But of course, we got transitions from happiness. Then economists said, well, happiness is a little bit vague. We call it utility. We maximize utility. And that from in neoclassical economics, microeconomics, that has played a major role. But psychologists have always been laughing at economists. Because he said, well, what is utility? You maximize utility, what does it mean? And no one could, in fact, provide a measurable indicator for what is utility. And the final way out for economists was, we assume that we maximize utility and then we can derive demand functions, etc. We assume. Let's do as if we maximize utility and then we can do all the neoclassical stuff. That increasingly felt a little bit uncomfortable. And then others, and we have seen this in World Bank circles, OECD circles, but also in national statistics, if utility cannot be measured, but if governments want to know how the economic performance of a given country or a given region or a group of people is, how to do this? And then in the course of the last century, we invented the idea of gross domestic product, GDP. We said, well, okay, it's not the best indicator, but at least we have something we can measure statistically, and we can define GDP consistently for each country. So GDP has worldwide the same standard definition. So we can easily compare because everything is standardized. Knowing that perhaps GDP is not always the best. But okay, we have something. And all the World Bank statistics and UN statistics, in any case, always take GDP as one of the common denominators through which we can compare welfare. But we also realized increasingly in the second part of last century that GDP has quite some limitations. And it started with the awareness of environmental decay. Because if we grow, GDP goes up. But at the same time, the quality of the environment goes down. But we are still happy because GDP goes up, but our living environment goes down. That feels a little bit uncomfortable. So gradually then we got a whole movement which was started, well, by several economists, amongst others Nordhaus, one of the Nobel laureates in economics, said, well, this perhaps is not the best. So then we got a movement toward what was called green GDP. So we have GDP, we correct GDP for environmental quality decline, and then we have a corrected measure, and that's what we call GDP, green GDP, and we compared green GDP all over the world again. Many, many studies in economics and ecological economics, environmental economics, welfare economics, in fact, have tried to make that type of correction. But then you get another problem, because environmental quality is one of the externalities. But it's not the only externality. There are other externalities. If you include one externality, why not include other externalities? And you have positive externalities and negative. Well, we are inclined to look into the negative externalities, but there might also be positive externalities. For instance, safety. If you are living in, let's say, two countries with the same GDP per capita, the one country, Japan is a good example, you feel very safe, very nice, so it adds to your welfare even though it's not immediately reflected in GDP. But you might have another country, let me give an arbitrary example, perhaps southern Italy, the same GDP per capita, but the level of safety is completely different from the level of safety in Japan. So if then you do not correct it for your feelings of safety, again you have a bias in your perception of welfare or well-being. So then you could also say, well, rather than having only green GDP, might also have clean GDP. Clean means very high safety. But once you start with this calculation, you get more and more problems, of course. And that has led Joseph Stiglitz, one of the Nobel laureates, to the idea of what he called beyond GDP. It does not say instead of GDP, beyond GDP. So we have GDP, we keep GDP as a measure, but we need to have other indicators. And that essentially is where, from an economic and also from a geographical and sociological perspective, the whole idea of happiness research has started. And that goes back to, in fact, the Declaration of Independence. It goes back to Jeremy Bentham, of course. But in recent years, we have seen, and certainly in the past 20, 30 years, enormous new and very interesting development in how to measure well-being from different perspectives. Not saying, well, GDP is inferior, forget about it, because governments need to have a standardized measure, but on top of, or in addition to, so that's what we call beyond GDP. And there have been a whole range of different contributions in recent years in economics, starting with the work of Nordhaus and Stiglitz, etc., and many others, especially in ecological and environmental economics. But already in the first stage of awareness of environmental quality, Kevin Lynch, for instance, an urbanist, planner, asked the question, what is a good city or what is a good region? Is it only GDP or is it more or something different? And also Barbara Ward, in her book on the home of mankind, 76, she raised the question, what makes people happy in their living environment? So there were already first questions. And more recently then in economics, Bruno Frey, but also many others, Philip Morrison, well-known regional scientist from New Zealand, they have paid attention to the measurement of happiness feelings in cities, in regions, among different groups, welfare differences. We want to maximize happiness, but of course there's an unequal distribution of happiness to the same extent as GDP is unequally distributed. Also in geography, more recently, we have seen quite a few studies, work by Richard Florida, for instance, on the urban crisis, also work by Karima Kourtit, who will later on give a small presentation also on the work she has been doing, Demel and Jean-Claude Thiel over there and Martijn Burger. And there's a person whose name I certainly would like to mention here, Veenhoven. Unknown in regional science, unknown in economics. But look at the internet, you find immediately his name, Ruud Veenhoven. And he has created the World Atlas of Happiness. And he has collected many data and then made some indicators how to compare not GDP, but happiness in different countries all over the world. And mention one thing here, Ruud Veenhoven, from Erasmus University in Rotterdam. He is a sociologist. And in the 1980s, and I still remember the discussion, he said, I'm a sociologist. I'm supposed to be a softie. But I want to measure happiness. And everyone in the country and outside was laughing at him. A sociologist cannot measure. A sociologist can never determine what is happiness. We can philosophy on happiness, but we cannot measure it. I want to do it. He spent his whole life on finding out a methodology for measuring happiness. Nowadays, he's in the 80s. He is seen as the worldwide guru in terms of happiness research worldwide. And if you look into his citations, many citations, and he's now seen as the authority. So sometimes it takes a little bit of time before the real truth falls down from heaven. Now, in the geography part and also in the regional science part, of course, we are also interested in welfare and happiness differences in regions or in cities, or even nowadays in neighborhoods, to go even further, into streets. And several new types of thinking, in fact, have tried to go a step further and to operationalize and also to estimate empirically the feelings of welfare, so subjective well-being, quality of life, etc. So there is a new type of spectrum of research coming up, which certainly will be very fruitful for regional scientists to follow. In conclusion, there are all kinds of new orientations. First, in the sociological literature, we find lots of research on subjective well-being. There's even a new organization which has just been founded a few years back called the International Society for Quality of Life Studies, with more than 2,000 members. So it's a big international organization in a few years' time. A lot of interest in this field. I was just a few months ago at their annual meeting, and I was amazed to see hundreds of researchers all over the world, different disciplines, working in this field. So what are they doing? They try to create spatial socioeconomic profiles in cities, for instance, segmentation, segregation issues, etc., but to measure it, you see. Geographical happiness atlas, I mentioned already, not only at international level, but in some countries, including the Netherlands, we have even a local atlas of happiness. So for each municipality in the country, we know with many indicators the level of happiness for groups and for municipalities and sub-areas, etc. Lots of new research also on satisfaction and livability, and more recently also in the regional science field, quite some attention for what is called the geography of discontent, work by Ron Martin, Anders Rodriguez-Lombeida, and several others. Another type of new research is on city and neighborhood love. I will keep that short because Karima Kourtit will talk about her work in a few minutes, where she uses notions from love, and love is some sort of psychological human feature, but in a metaphorical sense, using the constituents of love to measure, in fact, satisfaction in cities and neighborhoods turns out to be very fruitful. More recently, we even have tried to to estimate a production function of love, because love can, if it is determined by external factors, it can be produced. So we can also estimate a production function of city love, or neighborhood love, or street love, or whatever. And there's a whole range of authors nowadays working on this. Another element in this respect is the early work of Charles Thibault. We have with us Jeff Hewings, who is one of the persons also has worked with him. But Thibault, of course, had his whole idea on why do people move, why do they stay, etc. And they might vote by their feet. And that might, in the original economic setting, be seen as some sort of an economic driver. But if you would substitute economic positions by happiness positions, then you might much better understand why people move and why they stay. So that also leads to a new reprofiling of the work of Charles Thibault. And then finally, some new research fields coming up over the past years. First, there are less privileged areas, less happy people. That might lead to radicalization. Some of you will be familiar with ultra-right-wing and ultra-left-wing positions and developments. And that all has to do, well, we always thought it has to do with economic factors. But if you go deeper, it might also have to do with the feelings of satisfaction, welfare, well-being, life satisfaction, and so on. In that respect, I would like to suggest to you, watch the movie recently coming out, The Old Oak. Jeff will like it. It's on an old British mining area where the mines were closing down. Then you see what socioeconomic degradation does to the people, and then you see the level of radicalization in these municipalities coming up. Watch, if you ever have time, watch the movie The Old Oak. It's really illuminating. It should always be a must for all regional scientists. Also, new types of research on the productivity impact of happy employees. If you have a situation or a big corporate organization with happy employees and you make them happy, productivity certainly goes up, and that contributes also to regional economic profiles in a positive sense, etc. If that is not the case, you get the other one, the work done by several people like Martin Burger, etc., on job satisfaction and the Great Resignation. You might be willing to skip the labor market and do something else, the Great Resignation, because you are not happy in your life, and that, of course, has big impacts, of course, also on regional and urban economic growth. More recently, personally, we have been doing some work on the US. You know, the US is well known, notorious for its free possession of weapons, well, under certain conditions, but even the candidate president almost has been hit by a bullet recently. That has to do with what is called in the literature homicide, and we see quite some differences also in US states among homicides rates depending on the level of happiness and well-being and satisfaction, etc., in these states. The same, we did another study with Abdul Shaban and Karima Kourtit on suicide, which is, let's say, the extreme side, the contra side of happiness in India, where again the conditions under which people live and work and have or don't have a social support system creates high or low rates of suicide, etc. So all these elements, they help us to understand the regional differences in various phenomena. And that brings me finally to what is nowadays called the urban well-being paradox, also propagated by Richard Florida, Phil Morrison, Martin Burger, and several others. The bigger people do not create, the bigger cities do not create the most happy people. That is a truth. Verified by both Richard Florida, but also in different European and Australian and New Zealand studies. Nevertheless, people move to the city. So why do you move to the city if you know you are less happy? So that is what is called the urban well-being paradox. Still quite some economic, sociological research to be done, but there's a whole range of different areas we have to investigate. And I think there is a lot of promise, a lot of uncertainty, and I hope that also this session here this afternoon will be helpful in getting a better understanding and maybe developing some solid research which could help us to understand regional and urban well-being differences. Well, that was my sorry for the long introduction, a little bit on the field which is gradually emerging in regional science. So thank you. Well, we might have, if there are some, well, Karima will give the next presentation, but if there are some urgent questions, and especially disagreements, we like disagreements. So the first, I would like to give the floor to the young people, right? Who from the young generation would like to stand up? I totally disagree. Yeah? No one who dares to make that statement. But you might also ask a question, but the same, of course, also holds for our colleagues. So, any question at this moment? Not at this moment, okay. And then I think we'll go to the more operational side of this afternoon. So, Karima, I think you will start with the next presentation, and you will introduce the topic, and then after maybe 20-25 minutes or so, we will have a round for a discussion, etc. And then another presentation, another discussion, then we'll have a break, and then at the end we go on, and at the end we'll have also some more time for a more thorough reflection.
Okay. Yeah, thank you very much, Peter. Okay. As Peter mentioned, the operational framework of how to measure love, and if we understand, create a kind of measurement, can we also produce love in our cities all over the world? So, the aim of our research is first to explore the city love concept, but also the urban proximity that shapes our city, creating, let's say, a diversity in the city, like a vibrant hubs with socio-economic activities. Okay. Well, as we all know, more and more people are living in urban areas in our city. And what you see here is more the characteristics, we call it the new urban world, the characteristics of cities are growing in size and number. We see that rural areas are more dominated by cities, like the work of Andres Rodriguez. We have Ed Glazer and Peter Taylor, as I mentioned, bigger cities in number and size. We see the complexity of within and between cities, like the work of Michael Betty. He's also focusing on the flows within cities, the flows of information, data. We see also the work of Laurie Chandler from the US. Cities function as a multi-layer of data warehouses, so different kinds of settings of data transformation through different networks. We see also the work of Carlos Moreno and Carlo Ratti from MIT, Carlo from Paris. Cities are more into an interconnected hub. And all these, there are different kinds of flows and activities, and there is a relationship between people and cities. And this creates also the love and hate relationship. And if we look at it from the urban proximity that shapes our city through connections, interactions, that is also a foundation of inclusiveness, creating inclusiveness, focusing on the diversity of different people living in the city. Based on that, looking at the value system of different people, we need also different kinds of policies. In our research in different cities all over the world, in Europe and outside Europe, we see also that people have different kinds of appreciation and also needs in the city where we need also place-based policies. The idea here is to search for the X factor. The X factor, what is the X factor of a city? What is the X factor of a person, for instance? Are you all familiar with the X Factor British Entertainment Program? Yeah? Okay. So there, they are also searching for the X factor, looking at the performance of a person. The performance, they look at it from a balanced view. It's not only about singing, it's also the characteristic of a person. So the X factor means it's a multidimensional system that creates this X factor of a person, a city, an area. What's really important is also looking at, for city love, looking at different kinds of settings, like emotions of people, the value system, as I mentioned, not only the things that we see in our cities, but also the things that we are feeling in our cities. So for us, it's important is to look at the X factor from different dimensions. So the aim here is, in our research, for instance, here, is to do it from the perspective of cities of people. And the question is, why do people live in particular areas in the city? Not only in the city, but different kind of neighborhoods. And what is then the attractiveness? So our research is not only focusing on, let's say, a kind of infrastructure, but also at the competitive advantages and attractiveness of cities. And the question for us is also, what are the important factors that make a difference in the different levels of city love? But also, can we produce, if we understand the, let's say, the complex system of city love, and why people are loving the city, why city also return love to the people, can we also produce love in our research? So it's not only looking at, of course, the architects and morphology, but also the perception, the feeling, the ambiance in the city. How did we do that? Well, for instance, what you see here is a monument, the Taj Mahal, and in Greece, but let's focus on the Taj Mahal, for instance. Let's take the Taj Mahal as a metaphor. So what we did here is we blow up the metaphor in a, well, not really, but but let's blow the Taj Mahal into different kinds of pieces. You could use this metaphor as urban system. Let's blow the urban system and focusing on different units in the system. So what we did was we blow up the system into small pieces and into different levels. So each piece, each unit, we analyze it one by one. So first, blow it up, measure the functionality of each element, and then by understanding the functionality of each element, we build the Taj Mahal again. So what does it mean? The movie is gone. I don't see the movie again. So in the movie, what I wanted to share is how we did it. So all over the world, you have different kinds of scientists, for instance, also analyzing these kinds of monuments all over the world. They are using different kinds of tools, programs, and they are all from different disciplines. So what they do is also really measuring, analyzing piece by piece, and to understand how the Colosseum, how the Taj Mahal, how the pyramids have been built. And step by step, by different kinds of programs, they develop these kinds of monuments again to create a better understanding. A big challenge, if we look at our cities, is that we all face is, the challenging question is, shall I stay or should I go? Shall I stay and build my life in the city or in different kinds of neighborhoods, or should I move? And important is to understand, we use here the metaphor cityphilia and cityphobia. So cityphilia and cityphobia is a metaphor in our research to illustrate the complexity of the love and hate relationship between people and the city. So we are focusing on spatial attraction, but also the force, as Peter mentioned also in one of the slides, the force factors that shape and understand and illustrate the belief of people regarding quality of life in the areas where they are living. So important also in our research is to create a kind of understanding of the appreciation of people. How do people really feel? And also to look at the statistics and see, is there a gap between what we see in the data of, let's say, Bureau of Statistics, but also can we create a kind of data, a complex data set with different kinds of data based on different kinds of level in our system, and to see if we could create that better understanding. Building on the T-Bout, as Peter mentioned in one of the slides, T-Bout model, which suggests that individuals vote by their feet. So what does it mean in our research is that people, if they don't like it where they live, they will move. So they will vote by their feet. So this is also what we would like to integrate in our approach. As I mentioned, focusing in our research in different kinds of settings within, and also different kinds of cities within Europe and outside Europe, is focusing on the competitive attractiveness of cities, including public goods, and in the context of Charles T-Bout is the tax level. So for us, it's looking at a basket of goods, public goods, but also different kinds of amenities, and also the ambiance and the feeling of people. So if we would like to achieve this systemic view of the city, what we did was we used different kinds of systemic approaches for decomposing, the decomposition of our urban system, as I already illustrated by the Taj Mahal as an example, in combination of big data. Oh, here is the movie. So
Misschien dacht je dat je alles al wist over deze iconische
So what you see
bouwwerken.
here, different kinds of scientists all over the world working together to create a better understanding of the Taj Mahal and all the different monuments, using different kinds of tools, creating a kind of data warehouse using big data. Okay, so what does it mean? First, on a higher level, let's say the global level. So what we did is not a pointer, it's we decompose, we blow the system into different kinds of scales, different kinds of levels. But what we did, as I mentioned, we want to create a better understanding in a balanced view, as Stiglitz mentioned, beyond different kinds of indicators. So the different colors here illustrate the different dimensions, like infrastructure, health, ecological issues. So the different colors illustrate the different perspectives, and the different layers, the different skills, like national level, regional level, city level, district level, neighborhoods level, etc. By analyzing through a toolkit of different tools, we analyze things step by step, and then we build again the system of city love. This is just an illustration of Amsterdam. What you see here, the XXQ, let's say the concept of Amsterdam, the XXQ means how can we create the highest level of city love in the city of Amsterdam. So what we did through different kinds of constructions, interviews, workshops, collecting data, etc., we could decompose it through different kinds of analytical tools. We could identify 4 major pillars, conditions. So what does it mean? If the city of Amsterdam would like to maximize maximize the level of city love, they need to have focus on these 4 pillars. They said, okay, but what does it mean? So what we did was we blow again to the next level. So these are the important, let's say, topics or measurements to measure and understand, explain the social buzz, for instance, but also ecological resilience, etc. For Amsterdam, again, to maximize this, these are important, but we wanted also to create an efficiency in the urban system of Amsterdam to create and produce love. So what does it mean? We also look at the interfaces between the conditions. What do I mean? If Amsterdam would like to invest in smart urban mobility, they also look at ecological resilience. So there is always an interface in this urban system for Amsterdam. This is the framework which, as I mentioned, we looked at different layers of functionality. People are living in the city, work in the city, etc. And also the different kinds of people. So there is no an explanation of one residence. There are different kinds of people, and these people are driven by the X factor. Okay? So, how to maximize the attractiveness of cities? A good question, very complex. So the basic assumption in our research is seeing cities as living organisms with a body and a soul. If we are falling in love of a person, that means we are looking at the body, but also the characteristics, the soul of the person. The soul can be explained looking at historical, cultural identity, spirit, and the body looking at, for instance, can be explained by built environment, infrastructure, public amenities, etc. So it's a multidimensional approach. As I mentioned, the main aim is to develop a measurement to measure city love, but also to produce. How can we produce love in the city? First, we need also an operational framework, and within that we can identify and hope to identify different kinds of important elements in the context of soul and body that can influence the level of love in different areas in a city. This is just an illustration, some slides of different outcomes, outputs. We have more to show, but we don't have much time. So this is an example of Sweden, for instance. 4 cities are involved in this. So first we developed a questionnaire based on also what Peter illustrated, the literature review first, and then we, step by step, we developed this survey, we test the survey, we had a test group, etc., etc. There are different statements here. Okay, what you see, this is just an example regarding image, reputation, access to nature. So there are different kinds of things that we could identify, but also through interviews with people, local government, etc. We could also add things here. We had also open questions about the perception of the soul of the city, for instance. These are some answers of people, but these are just some examples. We have more. What you see here is our conceptual framework. So city love, which contains different factors. You have the body and the soul. The body refers to built environment, as I mentioned, and other important indicators. And the soul, also emotional, relationship, etc. in the city. This is our core model. Okay, yep, yeah. This is more also an illustration. The average in Sweden, you see that people really love their city. If you look at the different cities, you see that Stockholm, people really love it compared to other cities. And then if you go and look at the handles or the indicators, as I mentioned, the topics behind, for instance, a group of city characteristics. If you look at the city, you see the diversity in the performance for each indicator. If you look at city love, soul and body, you see that both are significant, but the soul is more stronger. If you look at the different cities for body and soul, you see, for instance, that Gothenburg and Malmö are the strongest here, for instance. And for Sweden, we see that the soul, both are significant, but you see that the soul is more stronger, have a stronger impact in the different cities regarding the city love production function, for instance. And here you have the Netherlands. We wanted to advance and test further our conceptual framework of city love, focusing on the soul and the body. The focus here is on neighborhood love index framework and the 2 sub-indicators regarding feeling good index, the feeling of people, and the human habitat index, the things that we are seeing in the city, the appreciation of people regarding the neighborhoods and the districts. What you see here, again, this is the city love, body and soul, and based on the database of Rotterdam, for instance, the different settings, we could also identify the main factors, human habitat index, feeling good, referring to culture, lifestyle, human habitat index, physical functional indicators. The database, we used OpenStreetMap data, looking at, for instance, walkability routes, bikeability, public transportation, nature in the city. And then you have the Rotterdam. This is a very interesting data set. So the data set contains different kinds of data. You have objective data and subjective data, which are measuring the same indicators regarding the quality of life and place-based related experience and perception of people. What does it mean? Next to the database are methods. We use different kinds of methods. Multivariate regression to identify, based on the databases, the key indicators related to city love, the neighborhood love index. We use the quantile regression to see which one, if there is a variety across different levels of city love, neighborhood love index, and of course the fixed effects model to assess the relationship between them. What does it mean? This is the Rotterdam database. A lot of data referring, you have, let's say, the individual variables, but you have also the indices in the database referring to safety, social, physical. Those are the main categories indices. You have also the different themes per index, safety, social, etc., for different kinds of districts and neighborhoods in the city of Amsterdam. The neighborhood love index in this research measures how people are feeling and also love the neighborhoods. The neighborhood love index, we took the average of the mean proud, connected safety and reversed, let's say, tendency to relocate, for instance. What you see here is, this is for the development of love index in neighborhoods and districts between 2014 and 2020. Here you see the total of Rotterdam. Here you see the different districts. And then you see 2014 till 2020. You see it's stable, remains high. So slightly degrees, but still people are still satisfied. What you see here, just one of the plots, maps, and the diversity in the neighborhood love index. I almost done. This is just an illustration. We have more things. This OSM results, the distribution of different amenities here, walkability, cycle, nature, etc. This is more the density of street attractiveness through OSM. Okay, more things here. Okay, as I mentioned, we have different variables, but also looking at the indices for safety, physical. These are the indices. These are the districts. This is the love, the neighborhood love index. Let's say these two, it's hard to pronounce, Schiedam, Hoek van Holland, they are very loved neighborhoods. You see they also score very well on the indices. What you see here is that, again, these are the districts. You see the neighborhood love index. It's really related, as you can see here, with the share of residents that are really satisfied regarding the living conditions, but also the quality of life. But it's also related to the share of low income. High neighborhood index related to the share of low income of people. What you see here, the model, very quick, feeling good, human habitat index are positive, significant. This is the first model. The second model, if we include also the share of low income, you see a slightly decrease, but still positive, significant. Of course, as I mentioned, we use different kinds of tools to identify the two factors. We used one of the approaches, and we could identify, based on a huge data set, the indicators. So, as I mentioned, we wanted also to see if there's a variety across the different levels of city love. We see the effects of feeling good. This is the feeling good index, human habitat index, the level of quantile. You see also that the feeling good is well performed here at the lower. And you see human habitat, it's better than the feeling good in a higher quantile. And you see also the income is negative associated with the high love income here. The pointer doesn't work. Okay. Conclusions, this is all what I mentioned. Important here is the city love production function. It's multidimensional. Physical is important, but also the appreciation of people, body and soul. It's not a manna from heaven, of course. You need a very proactive governance approach. Okay, am I done? Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Karima. We have later on quite some extensive space for discussion, but if there are some immediate urgent questions on clarification, etc., please do so. Yeah, go ahead. Could you introduce also yourself, because this is broadcasted and it's nice that the whole world knows who you are.
All right, so my name is Nono Gwe. I'm an assistant professor of economics at Louisiana Tech University in the United States. Well, I have a lot of pieces of my question, and hopefully I can put them together in a nice and cohesive way for you. So a lot of the research that you presented, when you were talking about the new urban world, it seems to me that a lot of the research has been conducted in developed countries. You mentioned Europe. You gave an illustration about Sweden, and I just wanted to know if some of the research has also been done in developing countries. And the main question here would be, do you think that the level of economic growth of a country has an impact on the different outcomes that you got from your research? Now, the second question is kind of tied in, if you don't mind. The reason why I talk about developing countries is because developing countries are known to be very bad at decentralization. So people usually come to cities because they, need a higher income, So sometimes I think because of this reason, the dynamics would not necessarily be different, compared to other places where people would go where they want to go. As, Thibaut said, people vote with their feet, right? So in a context where the economy is not as good as other places, then you go where you can eat, basically, not necessarily where you want to go for different reasons. So again, the main crux of the question here is, do you think that the level of economic growth of a country will have an impact on all the outcomes that you presented from the research? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your question. So we are also working in Africa. So it's still in a kind of process, of course. We started in Sweden. We did the research in Belgium. Peter will illustrate or present a few things on that. And then in the Netherlands, we also working in Ecuador, for instance. So that part, like Africa and Ecuador, is in progress. Yeah? But what we see is that even looking at income, for instance, people are still have a kind of value of the environment. Like in Africa, in Morocco, for instance, many people are coming to the city. And within the city, as we illustrated here, it's not about on city level, but also on neighborhood level. You have different kinds of neighborhoods. So it's not only about the income. Do you nog iets aan toevoegen?
Well, I think the question you raise is an important question, because that's at the interface of economic necessities in order to have a happy life and the need to be a happy person. Well, we know, for instance, that holds for Brazil, but it also holds for Asian and African countries, that despite the fact that life is more quiet and maybe more satisfying in rural areas and villages, people nevertheless go to the bigger cities. And that explains, of course, the growth of Lagos and many other cities in Africa, because it's not only a matter of here and now going for a high level of satisfaction, but it also has to do with the next generation. And for many cases, of course, we know that if you look into the long-term multi-generational impacts, that it might still be beneficial to go under bad conditions to major urban areas and metropolitan areas, even when for the time being your level of happiness is not satisfying. But that means, and that's one of the research questions, how much in our current decisions, which are determined, co-determined by happiness motivations, how much do we take in consideration the possible foreseeable happiness implications for the next generation? Now, that is something which has not yet been investigated at all, but it might certainly be something which could be very beneficial. So it's maybe something where you might also be willing to start a new research endeavor. Okay.
In Ecuador, we saw also that people are moving to be next to a family, even in a bad condition. And that is also a kind of feeling, because a family is living in that specific neighborhood, they still would like to go, but it's in progress. Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Karima. I think we will now move ahead immediately, the next half an hour, to Jaewon Lim and his assistant, who will be with us online, I think. And Jaewon, will you take over and maybe introduce him, etc., and then we will have the presentation. And Jaewon.
Thank you, Peter. It's very interesting and intriguing discussions about the well-being and happiness and locations and the individual level and the location matters, all those questions. Actually, we're using some US case. I'm going to make it very short. So Andres Rodriguez-Lombeida is my PhD student from University of Nevada, Las Vegas. And this is part of his dissertation about happiness and place-based livability. What is the link between these two, especially with the focus on the social capital? So unlike the case studies that Peter and Karima had been working on based on the survey, we were largely limited in case of the US. So we had to be a little bit more creative to find some proxy variables, and we're still in hunt. However, he will share some of those procedures that we employed recently. And having said that, I'm going to toss it back to my students, Andres Rodriguez-Lombeida. So you have 20 minutes, okay? Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Lim. Hi, everybody. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to present at this conference. And I also want to thank everybody for taking the time to be in this session. Today, I want to talk about happiness in US counties and the implications for place-based livability. As Professor Lim said, I'm a PhD student in public affairs at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, and this is my PhD dissertation. So Dr. Lim, who is a professor at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, serves as my PhD committee chair. I want to talk about the background, motivation, and issues for the study. The purpose of the study, some brief literature review. I'm going to talk about my research objectives, questions, and hypotheses, some of the frameworks for my dissertation, methodology that I use, some potential implications, and next steps for my research. In the recent years, there have been multiple happy city rankings, and these rankings, such as Wallet Hub, measure quality of life, but sometimes they use individual-based happiness and place-based livability interchangeably. For example, a city cannot be happy. Happiness is an attribute of an individual. A city can be livable. But as I have on the screen, for example, we see it on the news, we see multiple rankings saying, this city has been named the happiest in America, or these are the top 15 happiest cities, which by measuring quality of life, they confuse individual-based happiness and place-based livability. There's also been recent interest in the promotion of place-based livability. For example, the United Nations, they highlight the importance of making human settlements and cities inclusive, safe, resilient, sustainable, as they highlighted in the 2023 Sustainable Development Goals report. And also the European Union, we see that in the European Strategy Plan for 2020, they want to make European cities smart, sustainable, with inclusive economies, and resilient, with high levels of employment. So we see that place-based livability has been an important focus lately. And also in the happiness literature, there is a need and a motivation for considering space and place in the study of happiness. For this study, the Community Capitals Framework, which was developed by Flora and Flora, basically mentions 7 different pillars. And these pillars are important for the economic development of a location. And we put emphasis on social capital, which is one of the pillars. Locations can have factors that either attract people or they push them away. And Lee calls these factors in his push-pull model, pushing factors and pulling factors. And cities can use livability and community capital as either push factors or pull factors in order to attract people. And this is important because, as has been mentioned before in this session, the TIBU model, where people vote with their feet. People are mobile in space, and they will try to align their preferences with a location that matches them. And this is important for cities because they want to have taxpayers, they want to have a healthy population so that they're able to get tax revenue and invest it in their communities. One of the issues of the Happy City rankings, for example, we see on the right side of the screen, these are the top 20 happiest cities in America. Well, Fremont is number 1, and we see that Fargo is number 20. But there's also a heterogeneity problem in these locations. So the happiest resident of Fargo, which is number 20, could be happier than the unhappiest resident of Fremont. So these rankings also ignore heterogeneity. And also when it comes to social capital, in the literature, there's no consensus on the exact definition for social capital and how to measure it. Purpose of the study is to analyze the role of social capital in impacting place-based livability and also to identify policies that can affect individual happiness. And I'm focusing on urban areas. This study is significant because it explores the link between individual-based happiness and place-based livability, which has been studied before. But I do so at the county level, which is very local. It's a very fine measurement in space. Other studies have considered this at the country level, between countries, at the state level, at the MSA, Metropolitan Statistical Area level, but not at the county. And also I compare 2 different time points. So it adds to the body of literature. And also in the happiness body of literature, like I said before, there's a need for considering space and place more. I build on the spiraling up of communities theory, which says that social capital is a key factor in economic development and affects all other pillars for the community capitals framework. And also another contribution is that I will explore different investments in community capital where we can increase place-based livability. Happiness is both subjective and objective, and there is a need for integrating both. As an example, the Neighborhood Love Index combines both subjective, individual-based happiness through the use of surveys, and also objective place-based livability of Rotterdam through more objective measures. When it comes to social capital, it's one of the 7 pillars from the Community Capitals Framework from Flora. It's a vital factor in the study of happiness. It matters for happiness, And there's also a correlation that has been made between livability and subjective well-being, as studied by Okulich-Kozerin in 2019 in European cities. I want to point out that this study uses life satisfaction as a measurement of happiness. And at the bottom of the slide, I have a chart that talks about the different kinds of satisfaction. So the satisfaction can impact your life, just a small part of your life or your life as a whole. And also for how long? Is it a passing impact or is it an enduring impact through time? And we see that Veenhoven describes happiness as a satisfaction that impacts your whole life for an enduring period of time, which is life satisfaction. This is why I'm using life satisfaction as a proxy variable for happiness, just like it has been done in the literature. Here, I have a chart with the 7 different pillars of the community capitalist framework: natural capital, cultural capital, human capital, political capital, financial capital, built capital, and social capital. I want to focus more on social capital, given the key role that it has on spiraling up a community, meaning that investing in community capital has positive externality effects in other types of capital, which is good all around. Social capital is the glue that holds a community together. It's the networks that people have and they can leverage inside of a community. It's made up of bonding capital, bonding social capital, which occurs between 2 different groups or the same group. And then you got bridging capital, which occurs across different groups. There's been different efforts to measure social capital. For example, social capital in US counties by Penn State University, developed by the Northeast Regional Center for Rural Development, although this one was discontinued in 2014. There's also the Social Capital Project, which I'm using in my dissertation. On the right side, we have an image of it, and it's developed by the United States Congress, the Joint Economic Committee. And we can see that it has different indices. So for example, you have family unity, community health, institutional health, and collective efficacy. And basically this index measures different variables at the county level and the state level, and it tracks social capital. And then one of the more recent ones is the Social Capital Atlas, developed by Chetty, and they basically use social media to determine social capital. There are 3 research objectives for my dissertation. The first one is to determine whether or not social capital accumulation matters for place-based livability. The second one is determining whether or not place-based livability matters for the happiness of individuals. And then number 3, I want to compare expected and observed livability changes and community capital changes over time. And I want to do so in order to determine relevant policy actions that we can take in order to increase place-based livability, hopefully impacting the happiness of individuals. These are the research questions for the study. Research question number 1, whether social capital accumulation matters for place-based livability. Research question number 2, whether livability matters for the happiness of individuals. And research question number 3, whether place-based livability changes from 2010 till today reflect the changes in community capital accumulation. Some of the frameworks that support my research are Lee's push-pull migration theory, which basically says that some factors either attract people to a location and other factors push people away to other locations. The Tibu model that says that people vote with their feet, they will try to match their preferences with the things that a location has to offer, and it's in the best interest of locations to keep and attract people. Also, the cumulative causation theory, which states that when a location is obtaining assets, it will continue to obtain assets in the future. And on the other hand, if a location is losing assets, it will continue to lose assets in the future. The community capitalist framework, which states 7 different pillars by which a location can develop economically. Spiraling up theory, in which Flora says that social capital is key in order to spiral up a community for development, and the law of diminishing returns, an economic theory that basically says that no investment can perpetuate forever. And there will be a point where the marginal benefit of an investment will equal the marginal cost of an investment. And that should be the point in which we stop investing. For my data sources, talking about my methodology. So at the bottom of the screen, I have my 3 research questions and the spatial scale of the study. When I collect data for life satisfaction, community capital, and also individual control variables, I have data available in the US at the county level for all US counties. But when it comes to livability data, it's a little bit more complicated. They don't really measure livability at the county level. It's more of a more regional city measure. And as a result, I'm using the top 100 most livable cities index. And this is developed by Livability. That's the name of the organization. And basically, they look at different categories such as the economy, housing, amenities, safety, education to measure the livability of a city. And I'm going to use this livability of the city as representative measure for the county. And because of this, I'm focusing on urban areas for this study. The temporal scale of the study is 2010. This is because the data that I have for life satisfaction, which I'm using to measure happiness, the most recent survey that I could find that asks about life satisfaction is from 2010. And because of this, all my variables have to go back to 2010. So I can match happiness with livability and community capital. These are the data sources that I have for my research question number 1, where I link social capital accumulation and community capital with livability. On the left side, I have the 7 different pillars for community capital, and I also have my livability measure at the bottom. So natural capital, how am I measuring this at the county level? I am relying on the Natural Amenities Index, which is well used in the literature, and it tracks temperature, percentage water area, and the topography of a location. Cultural capital, I am looking at nonprofit organizations per 100,000 population per county. For human capital, I'm looking at educational attainment with the American Community Survey. Political capital, I'm looking at the number of incorporated cities per US county, and this is divided by county population. And the reason why is because political capital is having the ability to influence the distribution of resources in a location. And if you have a county with many cities, it'll be harder to determine how the resources get allocated because there's other competitors. But if there's less cities, fewer cities, it'll be easier. Financial capital, I'm looking at the credit scores of US counties, how easy it is for them to get money. Built capital, I'm looking at the number of fixed internet connections over 200 kilobits per second, which is the measure that the FCC uses to determine what a good internet connection is, a reliable one. And I'm dividing this by the total number of households, so it's not biased. Social capital, I'm relying on the social capital project, and I look at variables such as the percentage of children with single parent in a household, religious congregations per 1,000 people, census response rates, and violent crimes. And for livability, I'm using the livability best places to live in the US. And the furthest that I could go in time is 2014. So this will have to match with my community capital. For the second question, in which I add individual happiness, I'm looking at the Behavioral Risk Factor Surveillance Survey. And this comes from the CDC. And basically they ask, how satisfied are you with your life on a Likert scale of 1 to 4? 4 being very satisfied, 1 being very dissatisfied. And then I also have on the screen the different control variables that I'm able to use for my methodology, because I'm able to see who answers about their life satisfaction, where they live, in which county. And I also have a wealth of information such as, are they married? Are they retired? Employment status, income, race, which I'm using to control my variables in the study. I'm going to use a two-stage least squares regression model, which is done in 2 steps. At the bottom, I have my first equation, which is L for livability, how it's related to the 7 different pillars of community capital: social capital, natural capital, cultural capital, etc. Once I run this regression, I obtain a predicted livability, which then I plug in into my second equation, which is at the top. Y standing for happiness of individuals, L standing for the livability of a location, and then I have my other control variables: gender, college degree, are they retired? Basically, I'm going to look at, for the top 100 cities, so the counties in the US, for individual I at location J, I'm going to look at how livability impacts the happiness of that individual. And then I'm also going to look at how community capital impacts the livability of a place. I want to point out that because my dependent variable on my second research question on life satisfaction is on a Likert scale, I'm going to have to do an order logistic regression model because it's a categorical dependent variable, 1 through 4. So I will adjust that. And for research question number 3, I'm going to look at how the change in livability, if it's reflecting on the change in community capital of locations from 2010 till now. So I'm using the same variables that I did for 2010, but now I'm looking at it on 2022, so at a different point in time. And the livability measure that I have, the same company uses the same methodology, but now in 2022, which allows me to compare. By rerunning the 2-stage least squares regression model with more recent data, I'm able to capture the effects from 2010 and also from 2022, which allows me to compare expected with observed changes in livability and community capital. For example, this has policy implications. I'm able to create a choropleth map and show the geographic distribution of community capital accumulation and livability. So I may see that there are regional differences. We may see that counties in the Northeast of the United States have very little social capital, but much more financial capital. Well, policy should address this. Some of the implications for my study, again, this is a work in progress, which I'll be completing over the next academic year for my PhD dissertation, are that this study is going to give me the magnitude of the coefficients of the community capital on livability. And this basically will be able to identify which are the most impactful investments in community capital if we want to impact the place-based livability of a location. Let's say that if we're able to triple social capital on a location, we'll see that livability also triples. In this case, it may be a good investment to invest in social capital instead, rather than human capital, where it only affects livability by 0.5. By doing research question number 3, tracking things over time, I'm able to see whether or not the changes in livability matched the changes in community capital. For example, maybe I'll find that in 2010, I expect that tripling social capital will lead to tripling livability. But when I look at 2022 data, I see that even though social capital tripled in a location, the livability of the location didn't change. And we can ask ourselves why. We can explore that. And also, I may be able to find regional differences. Research question number 3 is also important because I'll be able to identify trends in community capital accumulation over time. Maybe we see that in the southern counties in the US, there's been a decline over time of social capital. And this may be a bad thing when it comes to livability. And because of this, policy should intervene and address this. For my next steps in my research, completing this dissertation will create a research agenda for the next few years. For example, once new data comes out on individual happiness, I'll be able to improve this study and get more accurate recent data. Also, I may explore places with low livability measurements, and we'll see that these places will lose population, which may lead to left behind places. And there's a lot of issues when it comes to these places, because how should policy address this issue? And finally, I can also explore inequality resilience between places, which is basically how different locations are able to adapt to changes in resources and disruptions, such as COVID, which we saw recently. Thank you very much. Any questions, comments, disagreements will be very appreciated.
Thank you very much, Anders. This was a perfect presentation. This is exactly the type of research we would like to see happening. And so we hope to see more of your work also in the future. There are meetings in regional science meetings all over the world, in Japan, in Europe, in New Orleans, in Las Vegas, beginning of next year, WRSA, etc. So there's a whole range of meetings, and we hope to see you more often at our meetings. So thank you very much. We might have a few quick technical questions later on. We have the more integral debate, but a few technical questions, if any, either to Andres or to Jaewon. Okay, but Jaewon, you might also take over the floor. Yeah, one question. Go ahead. But use the microphone also so that it can be video broadcast.
Yeah, thank you for Andrea, your presentation. Actually, I'm really concerned about the social capital, the research. So in your the paper, you just measure the social capital as on the percent children with a single parent and something like that. But maybe people have their own concept of social capital. Generally, we just measure social capital using the three kinds of core construct. The first one is trust. Trust also can be categorized into two things. The first one is generalized trust, and the second one is institutional trust. And the second core construct is the social networks. It also can be categorized into two things, passive network or active networks. And the final one is about the civic norms. So maybe you can find this kind of the social capital, the definition in the previous so many kinds of literature on the social capital. But in your study, why did you measure this kind of the index you use? This is the first question. And the second one is generally there are so many kinds of the indicator for the happiness. The happiness is your dependent variable, right? So the first one is the natural capital you use, but we also need to consider the physical capital. Physical, it seems like reflect the level of well-being, or no, seems like economic development at the city level or some kind of the regional level, but you didn't consider that kind of concept in your paper. So I just want your explanation on the two questions. Thank you.
Thank you for the two questions. To address your first question about social capital variables, so we see in the literature that, yes, the three main points that you raised about social capital, those are usually used, but the definition of social capital varies from study to study. Not only that, but also the variables that each study uses also varies. Some people only use trust to measure social capital. Others use trust, networks, and other variables So depending on the study that you see, you can see social capital measured by one variable or by multiple variables. The reason why I'm using the variables that I showed during the presentation is because the social capital project, we see the different sub-indices that it has. And I'm using one representative variable that I have for each sub-index. So family unity, community health, institutional health, this one has to do with trust, and collective efficacy. And also, it's hard to come across data on social capital, especially at the county level. So working with the data that I have available, this is the best that I was able to do when it comes to social capital.
So,
And then
Andres,
for the second question, when
Andres,
it comes to this,
if I may, just to add
Yes.
more to your first question, he has another study that focuses on the specific questions about the level of social capital being asked to the individuals. So, for example, do you have any friends, family who can resort to if in case of emergency? Those are the very typical questions about the social bondage and the type of social capital we really need to focus on. But as he mentioned, well, we had to take a balance in between, the what's available, how much do we want to cover. So, for example, his dependent variable about the life satisfaction data is the main source is NIH, National Institute of Health. But unfortunately, that just individual level data does not link to that actual county level or their residence place. So that's one of the limitations that we had. So we're playing with this data again. This is still in the work in progress, the designing and then refining based on the other types of alternative data sources. But he has actually worked on some other specific social capital traditional variables that you asked. So yeah, you can share some of those previous studies, if you want.
yes, so with Professor Lim, we've also done some work on how social capital matters for happiness at the state level. And some of the variables that we saw, that we explored, were the average number of friends in each state, census response rates, and different social capital variables. And we also wanted to be selective on the social capital variables that we're including in the study, because some of them could be very abstract, and it's hard for policy to actually impact such variables. So that's one of the reasons why I'm trying to stick to the variables that I mentioned before. And then for the physical amenities, capitals that you brought up in the second question. So for the natural capital, I'm going by the availability that locations have of different natural resources. So again, like temperature, percentage of water in the area. And then for physical capital, I think you may be referring more to built capital, infrastructure. And I agree with you. I can continue trying to find usually in the literature, they measure roads, infrastructure. But again, this is another lack of data. Finding such data at the county level and for the time frame that I'm using, it brings up a lot of complications, and such data doesn't exist. I can try and get creative with maybe creating proxy variables and approximating them, but as of right now, these are the only data sources that I was able to come up with.
Okay, I think it's, Peter, if it is okay, we need to take a little bit of break, 5 minutes, and we'll restart 4:40 with Dr. Soushi Suzuki's presentation. Okay, thank you.
but I think we have to continue with the program. So we have had already 3 very interesting presentations before the short coffee break. We'll continue now with 2 short presentations. One will be given by Suzuki from Hokkaido. And Soushi, you have the floor. You can use the microphone either here or you keep it in your hands, whatever you like. You want to? Yeah. You can walk freely if you, at least within a certain action.
Yeah. Okay, thank you, Peter. So I'm Soushi Suzuki from Japan. And the co-author of this paper is Kohei Kikuchi. He is my PhD student, just to get their PhD in this March. And also, I usually work with Peter. So I live in the Netherlands just 1 year. So I have a lot of nice continuously work with Peter. So today I would like to talk to you about these topics, bullying among pupils at school and countries' educational systems. So efficiency evaluation of educational performance in Europe by means of extended data envelopment analysis. So the keyword of this research is just this one, bullying. I think that this keyword might be have a lot of the connected with the geography of well-being and happiness. So I think it's a very important keyword of this research. So fortunately, so these 2 papers already published of this related with this field, Asian Pacific Journal of Regional Science, and just last month, so social indicated research also publishing of this research. So I try to explain something to summarize and key point of these 2 papers in this presentation. So education and bullying. So education is one of the most important factors for the development of countries and regions and cities. So you maybe know that this PISA, or a Program for International Student Assessment 2018, reported that being frequently bullied had increased, unfortunately increased, by approximately 4% since 2015. So this is a not good situation. Unfortunately, increasing of situation this one. And also, bullying can have adverse effect on student performance at school and general well-being. And related of this field, the Brown and Taylor suggested that school bullying hampers the accumulation of human capital, affecting students both during and after their school years. I think this one is also very important. After the school might be have a negative effect, might be continuously a long time. And their research also indicates that being a victim of school bullying can negatively impact well-being, quality of life, and future labor market earning. This one is also a very important topic of this one. In the school timing bullying is a very critical and very important factor for the well-being and happiness like this. So then we need to evaluate the educational performance, including well-being and happiness of the student. So Peter and I usually using this methodology when we analyze the efficiency or performance for each individual or each decision-making unit or something like that. Data envelopment analysis or DEA. So for example, if we measure the gasoline mileage for each car, so I really like a car. I have one sports car, Honda S2000 open car, but this one is a very low gasoline mileage car. If we measure the gasoline mileage of the Toyota Prius, it's a very high gasoline mileage car. If we measure the gasoline mileage for each car, we usually use this one, amount of fuel. So this is just the input or resource for each class. Using this resource, fuel, our output is just learning distance for each class. So this concept is very simple, output by input. If this score is high, this car is a high gasoline mileage car. For example, Toyota Prius is a high performance car if we compare my sports car. So this is just a concept of this gasoline mileage. Output by input, very simple one. If this score is high, high performance. This is just concept of DEA. And also our DEA model, our used DEA model also the same concept, output by input, very simple. But this DEA usually using the multiple input or multiple output like this. But the concept is completely same of this gasoline mileage. A lot of long distance output, lot of amount of output, and small amount of input. It is just concept, the high efficiency or high performance. So I want to skip off this formulation. So review of this related this field. So Yui and Shane already carried out using this DEA modeling and analyzed educational performance focused on the Chinese district or cities. And also, Aparicio et al. Also measured the US student and PISA using the PISA 2015 dataset, but we cannot find that the educational efficiency setting public and private spending on education as input items. In Japan, we usually spend a lot of private money for the child. So I have 2 children. So after the school, they usually go to the English conversation school. This is just a spending of the private spending. This one is also a very important fact. I guess the Korean situation also spend a lot of money for the private spending of like this. So this is also a very important factor for input. And we also cannot find this type of this one. Educational efficiency focus on bullying. Almost nothing to find this type of modeling, incorporating of this bullying in the framework of DEA. So, but one point might be the very difficult one because of I already mentioned about the gasoline mileage situation, learning distance, output, a large amount of output is good because a long distance can be long. But amount of fuel input is small, it's good. This is just a concept. But if we measure the efficiency or performance of education, the bullying is a result or output of the education. So then input is okay, spending. Small amount of spending is okay, but this one, bullying, output is just the same meaning of the learning distance. So then, this one, including of the bullying in output, this is very difficult manner because of the high frequency of the bullying is a bad meaning. But we have to incorporating of this is output. So then, undesirable data, bullying, need something inversion like this. This is just a very difficult point of this type of research. So then, the aims of this research is that the proposal of the value inversion new type of DEA modeling. This model can more properly transform this undesirable. In this type is bullying, which with maintaining the good characteristics of the linearity. The first aim of this one. The second one is presenting the educational performance, especially focus on the European country, OECD countries, 23. And also focus on the bullying and desirable output. And also applying this modeling, we also carried out the sensitivity analysis. If we eliminated of each output result, then we can check how change the performance for each country. Then we can check this bullying might be have a very big effect or not. We can check of this type of analysis. So this is the general method for the undesirable dataset output in DEA. So we usually using this type is a reciprocal transformation. The original data of output like this, bullying data, is just a linearity relationship. But if we use this reciprocal transformation 1 by x, then the character of dataset completely change like this non-linearity like this one. So then very difficult to how can we transform like this one. So then if we use this one, this method causes loss of linearity, and this method maybe change relationship of distance of each ratio of this data. So then we very simple way to transform of this data set. Definition of value inversion. So value inversion data set, this one, S, is based on original data, this one. So this S is just original data, like bullying data for each countries. And this formulation is very simple way. Max data from this one plus minimum data from this one minus original data is completely very simple way to translate of the bullying data set like this. The feature of this value inversion can objectively transform undesirable data, and this data also, this method also can be used any type of modeling and another type of systems like this. So this is very simple example of this value inversion techniques. So if we have 5 countries, decision-making unit 1, 2, 5. So bullying data, this is of course a very simple example. The country 1, bullying data 10, and 4, 8 to 5. This is just example. If we use this value inversion techniques, max is 10, this one. And minimum is 2, this country 4. 10 plus 2 is a completely fixed, this one. Fixed minus original data 10 equal 2. So then, DM use bullying data 10 to transform to the 2, this one. It's a very simple way, 4 to 8, 8 to 4, 2 to 10, 5 to 7. Very simple way, but we can translate very simple way to like this. So then, based on these new techniques, so after that, this one is a practical part of these studies. The outline of the analysis, the evaluation of educational efficiency in European countries. So we set the 23 European OECD countries, and the method is data envelopment analysis. And we also use this super efficiency type of modeling. So I will explain about this one after that. So this is just the outline of input and output items in these papers. We use the 2 input items for each country. Input 1 is public spending on education, and input 2 is a private spending on education for each country. We use the 2 input items in this case. We also set the 4 output in this case, reading, mathematics, science. This is just a result or the test for each European countries. And also we use this output for bullying. So this one is just an undesirable output for each country. Then we apply the value inversion technique for this one. Transform the data set like this. So this one is skip. So then this is efficiency evaluation result based on DEA and value inversion techniques. So original DEA models, the score, maximum score will be the 1.000. This is just fixed. But if we use the super efficiency techniques, we can analyze which one is a champion in the efficient countries like this. So then, already this one is exceeded 1.000. Then Sweden, Ireland, Lithuania, Finland, Netherlands, Luxembourg were evaluated the high performance or efficient country. The champion is Sweden. So this room have a Sweden persons? No? Congratulations for the Sweden. It's a very high performance countries. And also, Peter, Karima, congratulations. Netherlands is also the very high performance countries. So I already mentioned about I lived in the Netherlands just 1 year. So Peter and Karima never booed me. Thank you so much. So it's a really nice country. And I feel that the Netherlands people have a warm heart, almost nothing for something critical, something like that. So I think this is just a proof of this one. Netherlands has a high, nice, and high performance educational country, I guess. So this is very interesting result because of the economic growth or economic performance might be very important for the happiness, but these countries, of course, are high evaluation, high developed, and have a very nice and high score economic countries. But I think that this result is a very interesting result of this one. So, next step, we also carried out the sensitivity analysis of the output items. The original data set we set the 2 input and 4 output. This is a standard data set of this one. But we tried to understand this output, reading, mathematics, science, Bullying, which one is a very important or high effectiveness factor. So then we tried to understand the checking of this one. So then we eliminated each output items from the original dataset without reading 2 input and 3 output case, this one. And also this one is eliminate the mathematics, science, Bullying. So then we check which one is a very effectiveness output items. So this is just a result of the sensitivity analysis. Sorry for the little bit small figures. So this black graph result is just original score for each country. 2 input, 4 output case. This black one is this one. So this orange one is a without reading result. This gray one is a without mathematical result. And this yellow one is without science. And this blue one is without Bullying. So as you can see, 2 input, 4 output case, this black one, and without reading, this orange one, without mathematics, without science result, almost the same result, as you can see. But if we focus on the without Bullying result, this one, blue one, you can see, for example, this one, yeah, blue result, Netherlands and Luxembourg result, significantly down like this one. And also another country, Ireland or Denmark, Austria, Belgium, Portugal, Iceland, and French result also rank also the changing, and score is also the decreasing like this. So then this Bullying item might be the very important factor when we analyze the performance of the educational performance for each country in Europe. The Bullying is very important. Happiness and well-being of students might be the very important factor like this. So then this one is the final one, yes. So we also carried out the ranking correlation coefficient result like this one. So score, 2 input, 4 output case is the original and target result. Almost the same ranking of this one, this one, this one. But this one, without the bullying, is a very reduced of the score of the ranking coefficient like this. So then the bullying is the output item with the most substantial impact on educational efficiency in Europe. So this is key. Yes, the conclusion. We propose a new method, value inversion DEA, and also the result might be this one. Sweden, Ireland, Lithuania, Finland, Netherlands, and Luxembourg may be regarded as efficient or high-performance country in the European context. And also, we carried out the sensitivity analysis. So bullying is a very important factor in this case. Okay, that's all. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Soushi. A few technical questions, perhaps, on the presentation. The broader discussion comes later, but if there are some technical questions. Yeah, no. Use the microphone.
My question is actually very simple. When the efficiency scores are computed, if one country has a score of 1 and another country has a score of 2, does DEA work such that we can interpret it as country B being twice more efficient than country A? Is that the proper way? Is that the proper way of interpreting this?
Soushi, would you like to?
Sorry. Firstly, one more time.
Oh, yeah, sure. So you have 2 countries. After you go through the DEA analysis, if one country has a score of 1 and another country has a score of 2, is it the proper way of interpreting to say that the second country is twice more efficient as the first country?
Yeah, well, that depends on the score itself and the way it is calculated, but the efficiency index is, in fact, is based on the way the production possibility frontier has been created, and that's some sort of a segmented linear approximation. And the only thing which you do is to measure the distance, the radial distance, to a certain reference point. The way this is done depends on many techniques, and there's a whole range of different data. But the simple idea, 2 is twice 1, is not correct in this respect. No, it's more a relative ranking score than a cardinal difference score, right? But there's another question which I think is important in this context, and that's a fundamental question. If happiness is having an impact on economic and urban performance or whatever, does unhappiness in a negative sense has the same type, proportionally the same type of impact? And that is not necessarily the case. So bullying is a form of unhappiness behavior, but then the question is, and that was also here important, how to measure it. If you want to translate a negative indicator into a positive indicator, do you take 1 divided by, or do you take a reference point minus, etc., etc.? Some of them are linear approximations, others are non-linear approximations. So there's another reason why the simple statement twice is 2 times 1 is not valid. And I think one of the major important contributions, which you also find in recent studies on DEA analysis, for instance, in the European Journal of Operations Research, is exactly the question, how are we dealing with the negatives if we have only in our database negatives, or half of them are negatives? And that's an important question, because of the linearity and non-linearity assumptions. Good. More technical questions, perhaps, to Soushi? Yeah, Jeff, very short, because later on we have the broader discussion.
I'm a little confused about how you measure bullying, because in the old days, it was something that was observed within the classroom or within the school, but increasingly now it's done online. And I think you may be underestimating the amount of bullying that's taking place. And one measure that you might want to include is suicides among people, say 15 to 18 in school age. And that has been increasing very, very dramatically as a result of this continuous problem with online bullying that's taking place.
Yeah. Well, I think you make a very important point here, because electronic bullying, of course, is a different type of bullying, and it is importantly a more and more delicate question, which was over the past years very much suppressed in the OECD PISA database. Some approximations have been used, but the severity of the problem is there. To give a simple example, the person who tried to kill recently the candidate President Trump, in fact, is known to be bullied at school on a long-term basis. So it can lead to all kinds of extravagant behavior, and that, of course, affects the efficiency of the educational system, and is going to be more and more a worry nowadays, not only at elementary schools, but also high schools and even at universities. So it's a new type of question where reverse happiness, in this case bullying, of course, is an important issue to be further studied. Would you like to add a few more things?
Thank you. Yeah. In this case, we use this type of the questionnaire survey, but I think that we have a lot of type more different way of this one. I think the online or something like that is also the very important topics like this. So then I think that we try to more another type of the the measure of this one. I think that it's a very nice for the suggestion for this one. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I think we will now, without further ado, continue with a final short presentation, and then we will have a more broader discussion. At least 3 discussants have voluntarily offered to make some devastating comments on the presentation so far. So finally then, in the range of short presentations, I would like to introduce to you Peter Nijkamp. Peter Nijkamp is a first-year student. He has never presented a paper before, so I hope you will forgive him if the presentation is not as professional as we are normally expected them to be. But so, Peter Nijkamp, then you have the floor. Yeah, just a few remarks on the broader but also empirical context of research on happiness and city love, etc. Because most of the research in geography, which you have seen so far, is focusing then on how happy are you in a city. The work of Richard Florida, for instance, where he argues bigger cities produce not the maximum happiness, but medium-sized cities produce more happy people, etc. So that's an important observation, and we have seen several studies in the past years on this topic. But the question is, what is the range of impact of a municipality or of a city? And in this particular case, we have been using, together with Bart Neuts from the University of Leuven in Belgium, Mia Wallström from KTH in Stockholm, and Karima Kourtit, we have been looking into the urban system in Belgium, in particular in the Dutch-speaking part of Belgium, Flanders. And the Flemish regions is a coherent part, is the northern part of Belgium. And the question there is, what happens with the Flemish people? Do they stay or do they go if they are not happy with the place in which they live? The background for this study, essentially, it again is on hate-love relationship with respect to the city, but the way this paper came about was the fact that recently we have been celebrating the work of Charles Thibault, and voting by feet has already been mentioned by several, also by Jaewon Lim and Anders Rodriguez, etc., as some of the interesting theoretical frameworks to understand not only the happiness but also the behavior of people. Do they move or do they go? And you might say, starting from the Thibault, some people would call him, hypothesis, that if given the financial situation and local taxation systems, and you do not get, or you feel you do not get what you get for your tax payment, then of course you would say, I move, I go to another city where for my money I can get better facilities. So that's in fact, in a nutshell, the voting by feet mechanism. And we were asked also to do a study from the European side. Now, mind you, the American model on local expenditures is completely different from the European system. The American model has much more decentralized and localized taxation systems, where in fact a significant part of taxation is paid by individuals for their real estate, for the use of public service, etc., and that differs significantly for each city. And then, of course, you look into the question, what is the value for the money I get? If I don't like it, I might go, or I leave and go to another city where I get more value for my money. And in fact, that is in a nutshell Charles Thibault. Now, in the European and also in the Belgium system, that is slightly different. First of all, local taxation is a very minor part of the total expenditure pattern in terms of public taxes. That's a very small part. A little bit of real estate taxes, maybe a little bit of parking fees, etc. 90%, sometimes 95% of the money comes from the central government, according to fixed rules. The rules are fixed, so there is no, well, depending on the size, etc., there, of course, there are differences, but there is not much discrimination in terms of public expenditures from national governments toward cities and municipalities. So it means wherever you live, you pay more or less relatively the same. It doesn't make much difference. So that's a first question. Second, distance matters, because you might go to another city. Well, I go from Chicago to Washington, D.C. or whatever. But in Europe, that is not the case. And Belgium is a fantastic example of an enormous volume of municipalities. Flanders is, well, let's say an area with a little bit more than 5,000-6,000 million inhabitants. It has, well, it varies a little bit. It has many villages, towns, cities, etc., all with their own mayor, all with their own election mechanisms, etc., etc. But very tiny things. We have municipalities up to 5,000 inhabitants, with an own mayor, etc., which would be unthinkable in other countries. So if that is the case, and if there is a lot of variety among small municipalities, then the question is, if all other things are equal, and taxation patterns are equal, and if there is a lot of spillover between different small municipalities, is Charles Thibault valid at all for Belgium, or for Europe, or for other places in the world where taxation systems are different? And our answer has been no. Charles Thibault in his original theoretical thinking, his fundamental article on public expenditures, local public expenditures, is not valid at all. So there we could have finished our paper and say, well, we stop, right? We don't need Charles Thibault to understand European cities. But then what we did is, of course, to find out whether through the mechanism of happiness research, we might still look into the question whether there might still be movement, but not based on public expenditure mechanisms, but on happiness mechanisms. because you might still feel unhappy in a small village. Nothing to do with finances or economics, but you might feel unhappy. And that might have to do with access to public amenities, like schools, medical care, and what have you, shopping centers. That is true. And we had a fantastic big data set for all municipalities all over Flanders, more than thousands of them, and all the data, etc. And there is a lot of difference. Then you would say, well, all other things equal, we move from A to B because B has more and better amenities, has better theaters or better schools or whatever, we move. So then Charles Thibault again might be half right. But unfortunately, Charles Thibault is not right at all in this context because the municipalities are so small that in 5 or 10 minutes you can easily drive by car to the next municipality which might have better amenities. And if you have higher demands, according to the Crystallian framework, with different ranges of commodities, etc., you can go to big places like Antwerp or Brussels or Ghent or whatever. There you have all the things in the world. Those of you who ever want to buy diamonds, as we know, the diamond center in the world is Antwerp. Go to Antwerp if you want to buy diamonds, the biggest assortment of diamonds ever at quite some reasonable prices. So you do not necessarily pay $500,000 for one diamond, but maybe $250,000. So you have all the amenities still in, let's say, a radius of half an hour, maybe 1 hour driving distance. So is Charles Thibault relevant? No, he's not relevant. And in fact, what we did in our research, all the big data, we did all the analytics, multi-level scalar models, etc., finding out does it imply support for Charles Thibault? No, it doesn't. That meant, of course, that we had to look into the question whether still feelings of happiness might lead to movements, assuming that the housing market allows flexibility. That's another question we have certainly in Europe nowadays. The housing market is so tight that even if you want to move, you cannot move. So, but assuming that the housing market is flexible enough, you might still move because you feel that you might be more happy because of the body, the soul, or the social capital, as it has been mentioned also by Jaewon and others, where social capital, feeling close to your friends and family members, etc., might still be a motive to move. And that's the way we have looked into it. We have modeled this all. This whole study has just been published in, not in the annals, which was supposed to publish our study, but the editorial staff, or the editorial team of Annals says, no, this is not on Thibault, this is just contradicting Thibault, does not fit in a special issue. So in the meantime, it has been published in another good Elsevier journal. If you are interested in it, you can read all the details and all the modeling exercises. But that's a little bit the philosophical, conceptual background of this approach, where apparently differences in happiness and happiness feelings, and we had all the data from Belgium, plays a major role in the choices of people. Shall I go or shall I stay? Okay, thank you. That was my short contribution. Maybe a technical question, and then we will open up the floor for a broader discussion. Some technical questions, perhaps, of clarification. If not, then we thank Peter Nijkamp for his modest contribution. And let's then move on to the next step of our rendezvous here this afternoon, because we want to set also agendas. Before we gave the floor to Nono, you have to be patient for a while, Nono. We have 3 invited discussants. We have Jeff Hewings, we have Brian over there, Brian Kim, and we have Jaewon Lim. So, Jeff, can I invite you to make your comments on the presentation, especially with a view to, let's say, agenda formation? How does it fit in reasonable science research? What could be useful futures and so on? You have the floor, Jeff.
Well,
5 or 10 minutes.
Thank you very much for the invitation and the opportunity. My remarks and comments are very much in tune with the work of Andres and Jaewon, and also with Karima. And I think that what I see here is a gradual maturation of this work. And what I have found in the past that there has been a tendency to separate it as a very different set of approaches to understanding how regions grow, why some regions grow more rapidly, and why some regions decline. And I think what I heard this afternoon and what I've been reading more recently, I think there is now a greater integration and a possibility for greater integration with some of the more traditional approaches. And I think that's going to be very important. My main interest is trying to understand the dimensions and the impacts of the problem of household heterogeneity. And in particular, a lot of our models have been very much cast on the notion of the representative household. And the problem with that is that it negates the fact that households in most countries account for something between 60 and 75% of gross product on the expenditure side. So they have an enormous economic impact. But we basically ignore all that heterogeneity by focusing on their assumptions that they tend to behave in a very homogeneous fashion. And I think what we've heard today is that that is certainly not the case when we look at the dimensions of happiness, however that it is defined, that there is enormous heterogeneity. And this is a very important complement to what we've been finding in terms of the economic dimensions. And so now I think the real challenge is to try to more effectively integrate those two things. The second part is something that Peter's alluded to a couple of times already, is what is the inverse of happiness? Is it unhappiness, or is it something else much more profound? And can we assume that the monotonicity in terms of increasing happiness also has the same impact when you increase unhappiness? And I think the answer to that is no, because I think they manifest themselves in very, very different ways. And the work that you've alluded to of people like Rodriguez-Lombeida, trying to look at the sort of geography of discontent, I think is a really important dimension, and I think provides a very, very different challenge than measuring happiness as to how people respond when they are unhappy, when they vote in very, very often self-defeating ways because they feel that they have been left behind, they've been ignored, policymakers haven't paid attention to them. And I think what this does is really promote the need for us to go back and look at the foundation of economics as it was developed very early on as something called political economy. And I think what you're doing in this work is sort of revisiting that with a very, very different perspective. And so my main interest is to ask a very simple question. How does well-being and happiness, however we define it, affect economic decision-making? And that economic decision-making varies across a whole range of things, not just the Tebow idea of people voting with their feet, but the choice of goods and services that people buy, the choice of location that they make, and the way that these things might change over the course of a lifetime. So you have a life cycle dimension to this, which I think is also important. And in the same way, we talk about the effect of where you're located on your lifetime expectations, how the impacts of your parents affect the outcomes of their children. How does the happiness of the parents affect the outcome of children? And I think there's a certain amount of accumulating evidence that this has a very profound sort of allometric effect, a path dependency, which I think would be very interesting to explore. Most importantly, how does it affect democratic participation? Is the geography of anger much more visible these days? And is it displacing happiness? And so basically, can we measure an elasticity of substitution between unhappiness and welfare? And I was thinking as you were making your presentation about some work we've been doing looking at income asymmetries. And so one of the things I was thinking about is, can we sort of measure a Gini-type index of happiness disparities? And if poorer people increase, the increased number of people who are relatively poor, they're unhappy, what are the spillover effects on the rest of the population? And likewise, if more wealthy people are increasingly happier, does that spill over to unhappy people? Or is there a profound asymmetry where we find that the happiness of wealthier people has very little impact and very little trickle-down effect on lower income and more unhappy people? And if you look at some of the work that's been done using frameworks of Kenichi Miyazawa on income, this profound asymmetry is a dominant characteristic, no matter what spatial scale we look at it. So the question is, can we find something analogous in terms of happiness? And the sort of final few points I want to make is, one area that I think regional science has not really explored to the full, which I would like to see some work, and I think it links very much with your last comments, Peter, is the relationship between law and economics, particularly law and spatial economics. How did the institutional frameworks that have been developed in countries affect the sort of outcomes that you've been talking about today? And I think these sort of issues are important. The way in which discrimination is handled at a national and local level, the way in which welfare is addressed, the geographies of exclusion. And what I think we're finding now is an increasing degree of endogeneity in terms of the processes that you've been identifying. And yes, the expenditure dimensions may not be as important in a place like Flanders, but the way in which people create their local communities, the way in which they promote and extend through their personal interactions the degree of happiness is an endogenous way of voting without voting with their feet. And I think that is something that might be interesting for us to explore in greater level. To follow up just a couple of brief points with Andre's work, I think we've got a multi-level problem here, and what I'm interested in is the vertical dimensions of this, how the impacts at one level in space affect the impacts at different levels in space, and the sort of thing that Peter talked about in Flanders, where within 5 or 10 minutes you can move to a place that might have greater amenities or create more happiness for you without changing your physical location of your house. So what about the horizontal dimensions? And how do we integrate these two things in some much more creative modeling systems? And the final comment is the integration that I saw Andres and Jaewon and Karima developing, I think is exactly where we need to go. I think it would be a real mistake if this happiness literature went its own course without trying to interact with some of the more formal modeling that is taking place both in regional science and economics in particular. So I think you've done a very good job of product differentiating what you're doing from other work. Now is the time to address the irascible people like me who've ignored these sorts of dimensions and say, you know, this is the opportunity that I think now presents itself for you to add more to your modeling, the way in which the environmental folks were able to link up with classical economic models, that we can do this in a way that I think will enhance the work that you're doing and the work that we're doing, and perhaps build a much more comprehensive and valuable work. Thank you very much for stimulating presentations and for the invitation to make these comments.
Then we get so the first intervention by Brian and then by Jaewon, and then we can open up the discussion for the whole audience. Brian, you
Yes,
have the floor.
thank you, Peter, for organizing such interesting session for TRSA. Actually, I'm not really in this area for making a good comment, as Geoffrey gave us very in-depth of his understandings and his experiences with these long scholastic years and some of the very interesting comments that he have made. Yeah, so I just will give you just few comments and maybe some questions later on. So basically, when I look at this well-being and the happiness, this is probably some of the dimensions that in the area of sociology and psychology, and how this can be. I mean, we are looking at the geography or as a regional science, trying to look at these dimensions and how much we have been able to assume how people are able to associate their well-being and happiness. So, whenever I work with some of the projects with the other discipline, such as science or the engineers, I have to convince the way how economists or applied economists are able to understand their dimensions and how they are able to understand our dimensions to understanding, also associating to work with some of the interdisciplinary work to make the successful the outcomes of the projects. So, looking at some of the cases that has been studied by Karima and Soushi in the European cases, and what is his name? Andrew, right? Okay, yeah. So in the United cases studies, and so basically, I'm comparing this European case and comparing the some of the cases in Asia, looking at Japan or Korea, especially in Northeast Asian countries. I think there's the big difference on our cultural basis, how our culture has been shaped, and how our planning has been approached with a different strategies to approaching the for this our urban planning, as well as resolving some of the policy issues. So I mean, we are facing the global issues, but we also facing the different local issues, based on different community, different cultures, and I mean, some of the shapes and also the forms or the structures that we have established comparing between European countries and United States and in Asian countries has been, I think, somewhat differ, and some of the understanding has to be some, there should be some of the different approaches needs to be taken for this some of the strategies that we have to make. So, and I think one of the interesting that Geoffrey mentioned about the online issues. Nowadays, I think because of such phased transitions to this this new, I mean, what we call the new system, right? So we try to come up, how people are associating their lives and how many days, how many hours they're actually spending on their devices, trying to associate with them, with not just with your community, but also your communities in the cyberspace. So I think this is something that we have to really realize in the future to understand how we need to adapt this new changes that are probably will be happening more. And the other day, Peter mentioned about some of the from resilient to prosilient. Maybe we have to think about some of the cyber-resilient to accommodating some of these changes in the future. So, yeah, thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Brian, for well-thought comments. The final commentator, Jaewon.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you, all the presenters, and I'll be very brief since we are running out of time, and I want to have more chance to discuss with the audience. But going back to the two previous points with Jeff and Brian, and also with the Nono's points about the issues with the global south and economic development, but I thought of countries like Korea or Japan, as an advanced country, but with the issues of the too much of concentration, and we're all suffering from regional inequality issues. We know that in case of Korea, more than half of our population is the Seoul metropolitan area. That means it's continuing to draw the population from the rest of the Korea because of the concentrated opportunity. Well, then does TIBO model work here? I don't think so. We all, as a consumer, we are consuming cities, are consuming amenities of cities, and in the consumer economics, we know that love of variety. So if we're stuck here, the question is not where to go. The actual question is, can I go? Do I have any other option available? Well, it all depends on individual decisions. However, I'm not happy because I got too much stress in SMA, Seoul metropolitan area, but I'm still staying here because I can see the potential to be happy is much higher than moving to the other parts of the country. Then what is the role of the policy, at least the local policies, should be to wrestle with these regional inequality issues? That's my one of the points, and also then the bigger discourse about the role of I think these countries, especially Northeast Asia, it's not very much localized economies, and going back to Jeff's points about radicalization through the voting behavior in the lagging region or declining region, I think I see it here in Korea as well with the industrial belt, the Korean version of Rust Belt. They're losing their base, they're losing their economic base. That means, am I stuck here? Then what is the best way to vote to change the world? Not voting with one's feet. I'm going to be a radical voter. Not everyone, I understand that. But it's a tendency that we have observed for the last few elections in many countries. I think it is happening. So it's a totally different system, and the issues that we're facing with the limited options to move to the other parts of the country to pursuit of happiness. So that's my comments and discussion point. I want to open it to the floor. Yeah, Peter?
Well, thank you. Thank you very much, Jaewon, for your comments. I think we will now open the floor for the whole audience. In order to avoid that I'm talking too much, Karima, can I ask you to moderate the final part of this session so that you know what to do, and make sure that we get all the right comments. But you can also use the maybe the microphone over there. No, it's over there. Yeah? Is that okay? That's okay. Yeah? Oh, you have to stay here because of the camera. Okay, but you can move around.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much, Peter. I hope I can manage it. So Jeff raised very important questions and statements, and also things that we should think about in regional science, also the future regional science, multi-level approach, like the work of, you mentioned Andres Rodriguez, the lagging regions and cities. And it's important, but also in our research, first of all, we started with city level, but we thought, do people really love their city because of the city, or is it more because in the areas where they are living? And we saw also a diversity in the performance of the level of city love and neighborhood love. And some neighborhoods are doing very well, are very loved, other neighborhoods are not. And it's also depending on the background, the composition of people, the income, education, etc. So that's a very good point. And you also mentioned about influence on policymakers, the decision makers, and also the perception of people, for instance. Does it have an effect, the love? Brian made also some comments, and Jaewon, and I would like to invite you. Can you please share with us your points, your views, or do you have some questions for the discussants or even the speaker? So who would like to start? If not, I can pinpoint someone. Okay, let me, as you mentioned, can I get this? No. Okay. Wait a minute, you already had some questions. I would like to invite the lady. Can you please, you in the corner? You? Yeah? Can you please share your thoughts based on our discussion? Yeah, you. Yeah. I cannot come to you, but yeah. So don't be shy. It's not about, it's about your own thoughts and ideas based on the discussions. Or do you have a specific question or a suggestion? Does it work? Is dat een draagbare? Oh, dan heb ik die.
Oh, that's okay.
Hi, my name is Caitlin. I am an undergraduate student at Harvard College, and I am researching in Professor Brian Kim's lab for the summer. I thought that it was, the topic of today's talk with happiness and regional science was very interesting because I haven't seen that intersection a lot between sociology, psychology, and economics because I haven't focused on like a specific area of economics quite yet. But I just wanted to, I guess, sort of comment on city love and also the comparisons between different countries such as Korea, Europe, or continents like Asia, Europe, and Africa, because I thought the comment that Nono made was very interesting, considering or comparing the developing countries and underdeveloping countries. So yeah, I just wanted to open the discussion to that point.
Well done.
Karima,
Yeah.
for technical camera reasons, it seems to be better when you move around in this part of
This
the room.
part?
Yeah,
Okay.
I think so. Yeah.
Okay. Peter, can you reply on that short and I will come that way?
No, why don't you sit and
Oh, sit.
generate
Oh.
notes, stand or sit?
Okay.
But otherwise the camera cannot catch everything, and otherwise they only
Dus
see
ik
your
moet
back.
hier gaan staan.
Yeah, in this area, so
This
that the
area.
camera can have a
Okay.
full view
Okay.
on the whole audience.
Can you please reply on the difference between developing countries and developed economies? And I think it's not the purpose to compare developing and developed economies. And as Jeff mentioned there, what is based on the multi-level approach, it's more place-based. That's what I think, Peter.
I think this is a very valid question. And of course, we know there is not only heterogeneity among households, as it has been also put forward by Jeff, there is also a lot of heterogeneity among different countries and among cultural behaviors and attitudes in different countries. And the difference between developing and developed countries, I think, is important in this aspect, because it might be that even though your material welfare in a developing country might be lower, it might be that you still might be excessively happy, which might have to do especially with what has been put forward by Jaewon and Andres, social capital. If you feel you are in a protected system where despite some level of perhaps poverty and lower opportunity spaces, that still you can survive, I think that is an important element. Our study on the northern part of India may be perhaps illuminating in this aspect, because as soon as there was a shock in the economic system because of weather conditions, etc., and if farmers could not have a living anymore and were going bankrupt, and as soon as in particular regions there was no social support systems or the farmers had nothing anymore, then of course the suicide rate became much higher than in other areas which were subjected to the same shock, but where there was a community support system. So that also means that social capital, to put it broad in the Putnam sense, is an important driver also for explaining the happiness feelings, but the happiness feelings also has been said by Jeff. It's not only the feeling itself, it is the question, what are the implications in economic terms, social terms, behavioral terms, etc. So there's a lot of research, not only on a comparative sense, but also on the institutional side.
Thank you, Peter. Professor Park, can I invite you for your comment, please?
I'd like to make a comment about heterogeneity in the preferences and love of variety or city love. Actually, I'm in line with Jeff's comment. And when we, make a utility function or production function, actually we assume that there is a representative individuals or representative, preferences. But in reality, actually, there are some, unique, preference in terms of, love of places. For instance, in Korea, as Jaewon said, 90% actually live in cities, and majority people live in capital region area. But still, every year, about 1% of people, 1% is not that small, because about 500,000 people, move to rural areas or small towns in Korea. Actually, that is quite, weird, phenomenon, but it's still real, real problem. So that's the, that represents some kind of unique preference in terms of level of places. So when we make a model, we should also, I think that we should make that kind of, unique, heterogeneity in preferences. In that case, actually, most of people still, as we said, they love, to live in big towns and large cities, metropolis, but still, some people, like to live in small and quiet, environment rather than big towns. That's the way we can, revitalize small towns and rural areas in Korea. That's the way. Yeah, that's my comment.
Thank you, Professor Park. That's a very good comment. And what we also see in our research in Vlaanderen, for instance, the difference between urban and rural. Of course, rural urbanists are providing different kinds of facilities than urban and rural, totally different. It depends also on the distance. If you are living in an area with less facilities on the spot, but if you drive with a car, for instance, 5 minutes or 10, then you have a better accessibility. So even when you're still living in rural areas, you have still that kind of accessibility to particular areas. You are still creating a kind of well-being for yourself. And in our research, what you see also in Rotterdam and in Sweden, on city level, there is not much diversity in the level of loving the city. But if you look at the lower level, neighborhood level, you see a variety across the different levels of neighborhood love. So on city level, you think, okay, everybody loves the city. But if you go deeper, then you see you have a different picture. And I think also on the lagging and leading regions, because people are looking at it from the regional perspective, regional level, also policymakers, they are implementing policies on regional level. But if you look at cities and a level lower, there are different perceptions and value systems. So I think also in Rotterdam, when they are implementing, we have different kinds of data sets, as I mentioned, objective and subjective data. You see what the government is implementing and the perception of people regarding the policies. So I think it's more general, the implementation. And I think, as Jeff mentioned, we have to look, to look deeper into this, to the level. Okay, who else? Somili? Yes, please.
Maybe you can use.
Perhaps
you can use that microphone.
Yeah.
I do have some comments about the concept of happiness and well-being versus life satisfaction, and different papers talk about happiness and well-being and life satisfaction somewhat interchangeably, but from the positive psychology literature, what I remember is happiness is more like a momentous, and the life satisfaction is more long-term fulfillment and meaning, what makes life meaningful. So opportunity is not necessarily, doesn't really necessarily make you happy, but it makes your life fulfilling and meaningful. You work hard, you send your kids to the, to a college and things like that. So I don't really, I think the overall agenda is really interesting and it's a lot of potential, but in terms of the main concepts in happiness and well-being and life satisfaction, that's, that needs to be a little more elaborated, I think.
Okay, thank you. Sushi, would you like to comment on this? Like bullying, happy? Very short, perhaps?
Ready? Yeah, thank you so much. So, yeah, little bit different way to something comment. So I usually have a lot of interesting for the regional attachment. So if we have a very sad experience in one region, if I feel something there in the Netherlands feeling, I cannot have a nice regional attachment like this one. So then the education system might be the same thing. So in the small elementary school students, something like that, if someone have something, the very sad feeling or experience in this one, they want to leave from this region. So that I point, because I also have a lot of interest of the region, how can we develop or how can we increasing of the regional attachment what each cities. The Professor Park also mentioned about something like that. So in Japan, it's also very focused on the decreasing of the birth rate and the depopulating of the rural area like this. But I try to something measure of the regional attachment might be have a, I try to continuously living in this city. It have a very significant of the relationship of this one. The bullying and the regional attachment or something like that might be the one very key issue to improve of the too much concentrate for the city or something like that. So in Japan, have something to very big problem, decreasing of the region or local city. So that related with this one, I think that might be the Korea and Japan have something the same situation, low birth rate and decreasing of the population of the region. How do you think about the regional attachment is important in Korea, or how can we develop of the regional attachment in the rural area in Korea, something like that? So I have a little bit, regional attachment might be the key one of this. Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, yeah?
Can I ask just a question to our friends from Japan, maybe also Korea, and certainly also China in the future? Japan, with a rapidly aging population, going down soon from, 110 million to maybe 90, 95 million people. Nevertheless, and now we get the dilemma, you would assume that the bigger cities, Tokyo, Osaka, Sapporo even, etc., they might also go down. But what is happening, these cities, what I understand, are still growing. And so it means there must be a whole area in Japan which will become empty in the future, and these might be the villages, medium-sized towns, etc. Whereas we know from the literature that the most happy people are found in medium-sized towns. So there's some sort of a paradox here, which might have to do with economic reasons. But as we know, this will also happen partly in Korea, which of course is a country with an excessive high urbanization rate for the major 4 or 5 centers in this country. And as we know, soon this will absolutely happen in China, where there will be major problems for all the megalopolises which have been created over the past decade or so in China. So we are facing here an important research question on where happiness research intervenes with demographic research and also geographic and regional science research.
Yeah. Who would like to reply on this? Jeff? Yeah, oh, okay.
I think, Peter, as our populations age, that those dynamics are going to be important, because in most countries, the population over 65 is now 20% of the total. And by 2035, it's going to be closer to 30%.
Yeah.
In Japan, it already is very close to 30%.
Yeah.
And I think that there has been a tendency in regional analysis, regional science, to sort of assume that if you're not part of the labor force, you're not important. And that really negates the fact that wealth accumulation is even more unequal than income accumulation. And as a result of that, many older people have much more flexibility in terms of where they choose to live. And the casual empiricism now is suggesting that it is being close to their family, but most importantly, to being close to very high quality medical facilities. And that's a dynamic that has never entered any location equation that I remember being taught in graduate school. It was always access to the job, access to your, the Alonso type model. But now that's one of the dimensions. But there's another dimension that none of you has raised yet, and that is the degree of loneliness that is occurring worldwide. People are making the comment that one aspect of their discomfort is the fact that they don't have a good network of friends. It's very hard to make friends, particularly when you move. And part of their discomfort, I think, is being generated by this sense of isolation, no matter whether they live in a rural area or whether they live in a large city. So I would ask that in your future research and the sort of questions that you might ask people, ask them about this. Ask them about that. If you're talking about social capital, this is a very, very important dimension. But I think it's one that is becoming much more of a dominant cause in terms of location decision making. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jeff. We have a few minutes. One question? But Jeff, oh, very good. Yes, please, stand up. And use one of the mics, please.
Thank you. Yeah, I am Erja Kettunen, University of Turku, Finland. The happiest country in the world for 6 years.
Sure, yeah.
Also, Oh, it's been very inspiring to hear all the talks here. I would have many comments, but very short time. So I would like to actually comment on Professor Suzuki and Nijkamp, the work on school students that you do. Finland, I saw, was number 4 there in your rankings. And I would just like to comment about the PISA tests from 2018. I think you had it. That is a time when also Finland still was maybe a little different from today. So the results today might be a little different. And partly that's because historically Finland has a very heterogeneous population. We are up there in the north, the northernmost part of Europe. So partly it's geography that has made this up. And language-wise, also very heterogeneous. And as we know, reading ability is very important in school, whether it's maths or whatever subject. And now with the good thing of immigration, for example, because of refugees, of course, the situation is changing also in Finland, and that might then reflect in the PISA results. So this is a little like contradictory, I would say, so that a culturally very homogeneous country, traditionally very high in literacy rates and level of education and high equality and all these things, I think have contributed to the results that we had before. Just as a comment to your presentation, thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Yeah. So I have a very lot of interesting why north part of Europe feels very happy situation. Sweden and Finland is usually have a very high level of the social capital of the happiness. So that in Japan, I am happy, but deal with the low level of the happiness. GNP, gross national happiness, something like that. In Asian countries, something that present. So we notice that Japanese really happy. So then the next stage, we try to, how can we develop of the happiness? So there, we have usually face on the lot of the language barrier. So it's a little bit difficult to the migration accept situation, but now we try to something more improving of the language barrier or something like that. But I think in the future might be the Korea and Japan and another Asian country try to improving or more good for the happiness. What is happiness? Of course, the economic is very important, but happiness is more important. So we try to learn from the northern part of Europe or something like that. Yeah, thank you so much for the very nice presentation.
Thank you, Sushi. You would like to reply also? Okay, very short, Jim.
It's more like in a response to Sumi Lee's question about the elaborated definition of the happiness, well-being, livability. You're exactly right. So if you ask, are you happy or what is your definition of happiness here in 300 people, everybody will come up with all different answers. Sometimes it can be, I mean, it's not a relevant question for certain people who is suffering from different life, agonies and, I mean, but ironically, if we go back to the GDP question again, so if we develop some sort of standardized happiness index, that contradicts the definition of happiness. So that's where the difficulties of this subjective definition of the happiness. But yeah, if you're satisfied with your life, that's widely used and commonly used the measure for the happiness. But again, it's hard. I agree with you. So I think, it will be really interesting for all of us think about what the happiness for individuals and how it is linked to the location we live for the rest of it. And going back to Jeff's points about that's what we should head to with the regional scientists. So this will be really opening door for that case studies or the discipline.
Thank you, Jaewon. Who would like to reply?
Well, not reply, but at least I would like
Can you use the mic, please? Can you use one of the mics?
Yeah.
Thank you.
I think the confusion is when you review the literature, it's really hard to figure out what they meant by such and such. So at least in the paper, okay, we're talking about happiness, but by happiness we mean and blah, blah, blah. So we don't have to be confused, I don't know, like by different definitions and subjectiveness.
Okay, thank you very much, Somili. I think in our research and what we have seen in the literature, what we have seen in the literature is, of course, we would like to create more happy people, happy cities, creative cities, but also from the policy side. And what we have seen is, if you only look at policies, it's a one side. And we think to create, let's say, people love the city and city love the people, you need to do it in partnership. Based also on our data, you see, as I mentioned, the policymakers, local policymakers, are doing, developing new policies or improving policies. But it's important to see the perception of people, the value system of people in partnership with different kind of stakeholders to create that kind of effect of city love or well-being, etc. Final comments, very short before we close. No one? Okay. My role is done. Thank you very much. I will give the mic to Peter.
Well, thank you very much. I was so pleased to see a person from the most happy country in the world, Finland. So welcome in the team of happy people. But we also have more people from Europe. We have also people from Poland and Italy and the Netherlands and what have you. So it's really nice that we have this mixed audience. A few final observations. I think this has been a very important meeting, not only for out of curiosity reasons, but also for the future of our work, so as to get a better understanding of the complexity of the world in which we are living, and nevertheless we have to build a sustainable future. Some of you mentioned the Gross National Happiness Index. In fact, interestingly enough, that was invented by the king of Bhutan. Bhutan, a very small, tiny country north of India, where everyone until 10 years ago was supposed to be very, very happy, and everyone, in fact, had the same message: we are all happy. Nowadays, what you see also in Bhutan, there's quite some outflux of people moving into northern India and Bangladesh, etc., so as to find better jobs. So even a robust level of happiness is not guaranteed forever, and so the dynamics and the determined shaping happiness apparently are changing over the world, and with demographic phenomena, we mentioned aging, etc. This is once more very important. And why is this important? There are two demographic factors which might be very important. That's the heterogeneity, also alluded to by Jeff. On the one hand, of course, there is demographic aging, and there might be feelings of loneliness, etc. So it might mean that in an aging society, especially among the elderly cohorts, there might be lower feelings of happiness after a certain age, especially when loneliness comes into play. But there is also nowadays an important other element which has to do also with demography, but in particular migration. Because the stable pattern where people were more or less living in the same country is past, and especially in the US part of the world, but also in the European part of the world, we see that a significant share of the population, 20 to 40%, has a migrant or a second generation migrant background. And there is not any problem as such, because also the social networks among these people might be very tight. But at the same time, looking into the figures given by Soushi and the comments from our friends from Finland, let's say the level of literacy and the capability of readability of most migrant people, unfortunately, is far below the average country level. and I know this very well because in a city like Rotterdam, one of the biggest cities in the Netherlands, mind you, in some districts, 20% of the people is illiterate, can even not read or write. So the level of readability, which was analyzed by Soushi, is very low, and that's an unfortunate situation. I know this from my second daughter, who is in the hospital in Rotterdam in the southern part, and very often she gets patients who can talk with the help of their daughter or so, but cannot read or write anything, and that means that low access to, let's say, normal public amenities is problematic. And that will, of course, determine to a large extent also the percentage index of our happiness and even also the economic performance, etc. So the bullying impact, which we were just discussing, in the future will go through all kinds of fluctuations depending also on demographic development. So it's not only a sociological phenomenon, and it has, of course, clearly geographical, urban, and regional impacts. So, in fact, I think that the merit of this meeting this afternoon was that we have recognized the importance of critical socioeconomic, sociological, demographic factors shaping as determinants urban and regional development, next to policy, of course. Policies will always be and remain an important issue, but there are many exogenous and endogenous factors which ought to be studied much more. You've had a long tradition in, let's say, endogenous regional growth theories, but gradually I think we need to also focus on maybe endogenous happiness and happiness development research, because nothing is completely exogenous, and to some extent our world can be influenced, but not entirely, but to some extent there is scope for policy. So having said this, I was so happy with this afternoon, a fantastic collection of presentations, a great audience, many comments, and I would like to thank in particular PRSCO, the incoming president, and the still yet acting president from Japan, for their support for this great meeting, which is agenda setting also for the future. And I hope that also on other occasions we will have more of these types of settings. We will have in 4 weeks another session in cooperation with the International Society for Quality of Life Studies in the Azores. But there might be more sessions to come. We might zoom in on more specific questions, but this is certainly a very rich research area. So I wish to thank all of you, in particular PRSCO, for making this possible. This is a historical moment, and I really want to give a hand to the incoming and the existing president. So thank you very much. The meeting is closed. Thank you.